Hey there, couldn't help but notice you're back for another one of our marvelous videos, aren't you? I'm actually curious, what would you say first catches your attention when you pick our videos? What makes you pick us over all the other creators out there? Let me know in the comments. Alright, but that's enough chit-chat. Dead or alive, you're coming with us today for today's video. I hope you're ready to step into the shoes of the ultimate law enforcement officer as we dive deep into broadly every RoboCop game the world's received so far. From pixelated environments in the arcade or Nintendo classics to the graphically superior modern adaptations, today we're taking you on a nostalgic journey through the gaming evolution of one of cinema's most iconic characters. Without wasting any time, let's go down to analyzing, reminiscing, and celebrating the legacy of the future of law enforcement. RoboCop Rogue City 2023. Set to release in 2023, the thrilling action and violence known to the RoboCop franchise is making a comeback with the series' most ambitious film revival to date. Rogue City stars the legendary Peter Weller and has players control the dutiful Alex Murphy to rid old Detroit of crime, leaving the bad guy clearing aside. You play RoboCop and carry out investigations, occasionally handing out the good old parking ticket. Among the many familiar faces to look forward to, you'll be doing cop stuff with your trusty partner Ann Lewis in the first-person shooter. The story is set between the events of the second and third films and follows the shiny crime fighter through the game's missions and side quests. While this one's primarily a shooter, you'll also find dialogue options in your interactions, and these influence the way your story plays out. You can upgrade your abilities and weaponry and even grab what the enemies drop for a brief duration, scanning for crime, seeking violence, and using cutting-edge technology in the form of cybernetic augmentations has never looked this promising. RoboCop 1988 Arcade. Stepping all the way back to '88, the RoboCop that folks found in arcades and knew back then was a run-and-gun beat-em-up by Data East. This side-scroller is based on the original film that came out a year prior to the game and walks you through Alex Murphy's death. As a tale of vengeance, it has RoboCop crime-sweeping his way to Kingpin Clarence Boddicker, who's responsible for Alex's murder. In your fight as Omni Corporation's resurrected titanium soldier, you learn that there are bigger forces at play, and the plot thickens. While different arcade versions of this one each came with their own quirks, the game as a whole really manages to make you feel like you're in the RoboCop universe. The gameplay feels seamless, irrespective of the platform. I also really liked how well the sound effects, speech, and animation tied together to make things work for this one. RoboCop 1989 NES. Fair warning, the NES version does not go easy on the eyes. While I found the game to look far more pleasing on the NES, with its more vibrant network and pixelated graphics, it did exact a toll. If you can look past how tired your eyes get through the game session, this version presents you with faster mechanics, meaning faster enemies and your own movement speed, which allows it to be more challenging and therefore more addictive to play. Your character's HUD is easier to monitor if you're playing on the Nintendo. I mean, look at it. The HUD being at the bottom brings it closer to your character and allows you to keep an eye on your indicators, score, weapons, and abilities with little to no effort. The bonus first-person shooting segments saw some changes as well. As opposed to the arcade version's 4-quadrant graph-like crosshair, RoboCop for the NES came with its own less distracting crosshair. It even featured more futuristic-looking shooting ranges that suited its cyberpunk environments. Speaking of environments, my verdict boils down to why you're playing the game. The arcade versions do a better job of portraying a human, though fictional, world if you compare them to the NES version. The latter, on the other hand, with its smoother, addictive gameplay and immersive visuals, makes for a more refined and chaotic gaming experience. If you're a gamer and also a RoboCop fan, you might just end up wanting to give both a go. RoboCop 2 1991 Arcade. Just like the first one was based on the original film that came before the video game adaptation, RoboCop 2 was based on the second RoboCop film. The plot here follows our titular cyborg cop from Detroit, whom you obviously play, in his quest to take down a drug-dealing syndicate called the Nuke Cult. At the head of this empire is Kane, who not only pushes his drug nuke on the street, but also has his own advanced technology to give Alex a challenging fight. On paper, this one was very similar to the first game, but saw a bunch of additions made to different versions across various platforms. This one was a blast to play and jumped rope with any lines that could potentially fit its gameplay into one category. Allow me to explain. One moment you were playing a beat-em-up title at your local arcade, and the next had you engaging in gallery shooting segments with the occasional first-person stages, only to proceed to a bit that makes you mash prompted buttons to overcome an enemy or obstacle. The most notable change, simple as it is, was that you could now move along both the X and Y axis in the game's environments. RoboCop 2 1991 NES. RoboCop 2 on the NES, however, was a completely different story. For starters, this one wasn't half as well received as its arcade version. In fact, it was a bit of a downgrade from all the titles that came before it. You couldn't explore along both axes and were instead given a game that went overboard to emphasize its new jump mechanic. While the NES version was purely a run-and-gun game, it still surprised me with how many different types of obstacles there were to clear. If you take the gunplay out of the equation and squint, I swear it feels like you're playing a Mario game. It even has a similar animation that has you crouch in order to go down a pipeline to access parts of the map. The arcade version packed some really cool pixel art and improved graphics, but the NES version was too fixed in its retro roots, complete with a short-looking RoboCop and heavily pixelated graphics. This one went on to be a rage game and often made the mightiest gamers quit on account of its insufferable controls and how RoboCop would drift further even when you stopped pushing the button. RoboCop 3 1992 NES. Fun fact, the third RoboCop game for the NES actually came out even before the third RoboCop film was released, while still being based on the film. This action game is a sequel to the previous NES RoboCop game and has you playing as Alex Murphy to fight against the powerful Omnicorp and its relentless rehab mercenaries as they try to drive out Detroit citizens to build their futuristic Delta City. In a major improvement over the second game, your player character no longer drifts like he's on ice. Actually, the jumping mechanic saw some refining too, and clearing those platformer gaps after a bit of a run-up feels far more satisfying. The NES version came with 5 side-scrolling levels, and the ability to switch weapons on the fly does the game a great service. This one also, however, like the previous one, had a few issues with its controls. Nevertheless, if you're a fan and can be patient in figuring out how your enemies work along with adapting to its difficult controls, there's a decent amount of fun to be had here. RoboCop 3 1992 Sega Genesis SNES. Following the NES version, we got the versions that were released for the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. I'm going to cover these two together since the Genesis version is based on the SNES version. These felt like an enhanced port of RoboCop 1 or 2's arcade versions. The color tones used were deeper and not as heavily saturated. I found them to better suit the film's atmosphere and thought they brought a more serious vibe to the gameplay, unlike the NES versions, which felt like an entirely different platforming universe. Sure, these graphics were met with a lack of great reception, but I thought they went with the lore. These two also ditched the fast movement speeds and took to a stiffer style of animation paired with impressive digitized stills. Both of them even came with an additional 6th level. But Genesis's RoboCop lets you play with a sweet flamethrower that you won't find in either of the Nintendo versions. Beware of the sound effects here though, they don't sound as soft and pleasant as the NES version. RoboCop vs. the Terminator 1993. Sega Genesis, Sega Game Gear, Sega Master System. The next title mixed things up a bit and certainly had the fans riled up to give it a shot. As the name implies, this one is a crossover between two big franchises and is based on a comic book miniseries from 1994. The story for Genesis, Game Gear, and Master System has Cyberdyne Systems use some RoboCop tech to make Skynet. The result was a war between the self-aware Skynet and all of humanity, with RoboCop fighting to defeat the Terminators. This crossover, where you played RoboCop, was a promising, gore-filled, action-packed title, ready to breathe some new life into the RoboCop games. While it took on the same 2D side-scrolling format, the style was one we hadn't seen before. This style, which I speak of, was undoubtedly attributable to gunplay, which improved significantly, and the increase in violence depicted. RoboCop vs. the Terminator 1993 SNES. Within a similar setting as a version of the Sega consoles, the SNES version was more or less the same game, but with a few alterations that made it play out far slower. For instance, while the story and its premise are all very exciting, the SNES version told it slowly, with its comic-like scenes which had me waiting for them to end so I could play the next level. You wouldn't find these cutscenes in the other versions, which simply explains a story in one go at the beginning through a text box. Still, I have to applaud the first-person shooting segments enhanced by the Mode 7 graphics here. Additionally, your cyborg hero's suit feels like it actually has some weight to it, which I personally find to be a critical aspect in any RoboCop game. As far as the sound design and music go, the Sega version took the cake and managed to pack a more energetic experience. The overall general verdict of this title is that you'll probably enjoy it more on the Sega consoles, even though the level design remains the same. RoboCop 2003. 2003's RoboCop game by Titus Interactive broke the usual format of the RoboCop games before and gave the fans this first-person shooter. All the games before only dabbled in first-person gameplay for the occasional bonus segments, but this one is exclusively set in first person. The story is inspired by rather than based on the RoboCop films and has our beat cop cyborg looking into a new drug and its connection to the mayor and Omnicorp. With its slower player movement speed, lack of friendly controls, and mediocre target system, this 2003 game was quite the challenge. It showed great promise when it first came out, but the sluggish aiming and overpowered enemies added to the list of things that worked against this title. Unfortunately for Titus, this one stooped lower than their 1999 Superman game. It wasn't all bad still. Some, myself included, were of the opinion that it did manage to capture the film's environment. RoboCop 2004. Our next title that placed players in the titular hero's titanium bones was a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up effort for mobile phones. You played as Alex to clear this one's missions, all of which take you through the franchise's portrayal of Detroit to clean the streets and reduce crime. After a good amount of crime fighting and sweeping the street with Clarence Bodiger's thugs, you proceed to take on the infamous Omnicorp. This one's saving grace was that it tried to recreate the goodness of the first two games with their arcade styles and borrowed elements from the plot of the first film. It was coded in Java for its mobile debut, but wasn't much of a significant entry. Given that it was a tie-in, you had to purchase and download patiently. Moreover, RoboCop 2004's reviews were tainted by poor audiovisual work with a dash of slow sprites and laggy animation. RoboCop 2014. The 2014 tie-in game for the RoboCop franchise took the form of a free-to-play mobile game. This shooter was based on the 2014 remake of the film, but the plot was this being a tie-in was a different story. Right off the bat, you're introduced to Dr. Norton's assistant, who explains that she's there to assist and guide you through Omnicorp's OCP simulation training. The levels have you fighting holographic enemies in a simulation, and you're rewarded with resources to spend on upgrades because Omnicorp is impressed with your performance and invests more money in RoboCop's development. As you scout enemies from behind cover, you'll see how well done this defensive mechanic is. Your environments carry a decent amount of detail, and as an improvement from the previous games, this one had far better controls, perhaps because they were all touchscreen based. While it was among the more competent RoboCop titles, this one did have its own shortcomings. The in-app purchases deem this one a greedy application, and sadly, you'll have to pay heavily to play with its best weapons. RoboCop in Mortal Kombat 11 2019. As a part of Mortal Kombat 11's DLC expansion, Aftermath, RoboCop joined the roster as a zoner. For the uninitiated, a zoner is a character who shines bright while fighting enemies from afar. These guys typically use projectiles or long pokes more than their close-range combat abilities. Peter Weller even reprised this role after all these years since RoboCop 2. The Mortal Kombat games, particularly NetherRealm's MK titles, have a reputation for keeping players guessing as far as the guest appearance characters go, and have once again managed to evoke nostalgia for the 80s action film era. If it hasn't already occurred to you, MK11 also lets players play as the Terminator. Yes, the Aftermath expansion fantastically gives you another chance to revisit Frank Miller's comic miniseries experience, but with MK11's gloriously intricate movesets and abilities, As I said, RoboCop plays like a zoner in this one, which entails that his moves and combos are heavily centered on projectiles like his iconic sidearm, a rifle, a shoulder cannon, other explosive weapons, and more. Up close, there are a decent number of attacks and throws that allow you to knock enemies back before you dominate from afar. Aside from bringing kick-ass ranged movies, Murphy brings along with him his cool demeanor and iconic walk. RoboCop in Fortnite 2022. I don't really think I need to explain what Fortnite is to any of our viewers, but for those that need me to, Fortnite is a 100-player battle royale that lets you build using resources found all over the map to trap or fool enemies and defend against their attacks. Now, Fortnite is one of those games that has a crazy ton of character customization to offer, be it your weapon skins, your own character skin, your skin outfit, your vehicle wraps, your backpacks, or your pickaxes, which let you harvest resources. Among Fortnite's many skins was the RoboCop skin, which was introduced to this top battle royale third-person shooter during the game's third chapter's second season. Not only was the surprise collaboration something that had the fans hyping, but the skin was actually fairly decent in capturing the clean, iconic cyborg from the original films. The bundle even came with Leg 209 back bling that doubled as a pickaxe. I particularly liked the effects on Leg 209 and the way it sparks a bit, given that they were torn off of Ed 209 in the films. Last but not least, they even added a cute traversal emote with a tiny Ed 209, where you sit on the droid and can move around slowly but with some style. Broforce 2050, one of my personal favorites. Broforce is the action-packed, side-scrolling, run-and-gun title that would go as far as calling a game that resembles the Contra games. Almost all your favorite classic pop culture icons star in Broforce as members of the bro community. You fight terrorists and rescue other bros. The bros you rescue play prisoners of war, and the gameplay in this one overwhelms you with heaps of enemies and their projectile attacks. Broforce was the game that set in stone what the masses already knew from the previous games. As a character, RoboCop's future was far brighter in the hands of the fans. RoboCop is among the many bros here and has his handy Auto 9 pistol along with tracking shot ability. Playing the cyborg law enforcer in Broforce's destructible environments is always an absolute ball. Marvelous verdict. Well, gamers, that's our time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this brief overview of the RoboCop games. I'm with all of you guys as a heartbroken fan of the all-time classic franchise and feeling sorry that the cyber-augmented law enforcer was rarely given the film or game sequels it deserved. But there might be hope yet. RoboCop's upcoming title, Rogue City, has a lot of fans relying on it to bring back everything that was awesome about the films. More so now than ever before, given the technical standards and expectations that consoles today have managed to surpass. Do drop a word or two about which game you enjoyed the most, and stay tuned for more. Stay marvelous, gamers!